why being a Roman slave was worse than you think, and more a slow, immersive journey through Roman society, its shadows, its secrets, and its splendor. Introduction. Welcome. You're safe. You're here. Let's travel back, slowly. Tonight, we'll be drifting through the ancient Roman Empire, not the glorious parades or the towering marble temples you may picture, but something quieter, deeper, and far more revealing. We'll begin low, in the dark corners of Roman households, among the nameless and forgotten, the enslaved. Then we'll rise slightly, into the dust and clangor of a gladiator school, where rebellion once flickered beneath iron chains. We'll move deeper still, into the sewers of Rome, following the trail of strange objects, bitter jokes, and silent curses. And finally, we'll end at the top, dinning beside emperors, where extravagance often masked decay. This is not the history of battles and conquests. This is the history of ordinary people, strange habits, and whispered fears. This is the side of Rome that moved slowly, and sometimes never moved at all. So take a deep breath, settle in, let the past arrive like a fog, soft, steady, and unhurried. Let's begin. Introduction. Welcome. You're safe. You're here. Let's travel back slowly. Tonight, we'll be drifting through the ancient Roman Empire, not the glorious parades or the towering marble temples you may picture, but something quieter, deeper, and far more revealing. We'll begin low, in the dark corners of Roman households, among the nameless and forgotten, the enslaved. Then we'll rise slightly, into the dust and clangor of a gladiator school, where rebellion once flickered beneath iron chains. We'll move deeper still, into the sewers of Rome, following the trail of strange objects, bitter jokes, and silent curses. And finally, we'll end at the top, dinning beside emperors, where extravagance often masked decay. This is not the history of battles and conquests. This is the history of ordinary people, strange habits, and whispered fears. This is the side of Rome that moved slowly, and sometimes never moved at all. So take a deep breath, settle in, let the past arrive like a fog, soft, steady, and unhurried. Let's begin. Why it sucked to be a slave in ancient Rome. Punishments, household hierarchy, and lives without identity. Imagine waking up on a stone floor, no blanket, just straw and a draft that creeps in through a wooden doorway you were not allowed to pass through. The first thing you hear is footsteps not your own, of course, and then the sharp call of a name that isn't really yours. You've been given one, sure, but it doesn't belong to you. It never did. You are a slave, and you are in ancient Rome. Slavery in Rome wasn't based on race, but on conquest, debt, and birth. Entire villages captured in war were sold into labor. Children born to enslaved mothers were enslaved from their first breath. Some were once merchants, poets, warriors. But in the eyes of the law, none of that mattered. A slave wasn't considered a person. Not really. They were a thing, property, an object to be bought, sold, punished, or even killed, with almost no consequence to the owner. Inside a typical Roman household, slaves made up a quiet majority. There were different roles. Of course, some worked in the kitchens, endlessly grinding grain and hauling water. Others were personal attendants, dressing the lady of the house, arranging her hair, helping her slip into layers of silk and scented oils. Some were tutors, scribes, accountants, even doctors. Educated Greeks, especially, were highly prized and often treated slightly better. But better is relative. There were no days off, no right to say no, and no protection from whims. A displeased master could have you flogged, branded, or worse. In wealthier homes, the hierarchy was absurdly complex. There were ordinary, the general household workers, vicarous slaves of slaves, even a rationibus who handled finances. The more trusted your role, the more you were watched, and those at the top still had no true freedom. Some owners believed in fear, others believed in order, most believed in both. One chilling punishment, rarely spoken aloud but well known, was called crucifixio sevorum, crucifixion, not just for rebellion, but for disobedience, theft, or simply bad luck. It wasn't common inside cities, but its threat hung low, like a cold fog. And there were smaller things too. Quiet humiliations. Slaves had to stand while free citizens sat. They had no last names. They were not allowed to marry, not officially, anyway. The word used for a slave marriage was contubernium, meaning tentmate, a temporary pairing. A kindness, maybe, but never a right. Despite all this, some enslaved people found ways to carve out humanity. They told jokes. They sang while they worked. They fell in love. They helped raise the children of the family who owned them, sometimes more gently than their own parents might have. And in rare cases, very rare, they could buy their freedom, or be granted it for loyalty. Even then, the shadow never fully lifted. Many former slaves became freedmen. They could own businesses, vote in limited ways, even grow wealthy. But they still carried a social mark. Many wore a small cap, called a pileus, to show they were no longer slaves, but no one ever forgot where they came from. And yet, the Roman world ran on their backs. Their labor laid the stones of the roads, tended the vineyards, raised the children, kept the temples lit. Their names may be gone, but their hands shaped an empire. Now, As we leave behind the quiet corners of the Roman domus, the grinding kitchens and shadowed courtyards, we'll rise into the dust and heat of another space entirely. It's louder here. Metal strikes, metal, sand crunches underfoot, and the men you see are being trained not to serve, but to kill. Spartacus, from gladiator to ghost story, the real revolt, Rome's fear, and how the legend was shaped centuries later. The air here feels different, heavy, warm, but dry, thick with the scent of sweat, iron, and distant oil lamps. You're standing near the edge of a walled compound in Capua, far to the south of Rome. The sounds are rhythmic grunts, shouts, the dull thud of wooden swords colliding with shields. This is a ludus, a gladiator training school, and among the dozens of men sparring under the watch of stern doctors, there's one whose presence isn't loud but still impossible to ignore. His name is Spartacus. We don't know exactly where he was born. Some say Thrace, the rugged region near modern-day Bulgaria. He may have served in the Roman army at one point, then deserted, or perhaps he was captured in war. However it happened, he eventually arrived in chains at this very school, run by a man named Lentulus Patiatus. Gladiator schools were not like Roman villas. They were closer to prisons. The men here were slaves forced to fight, trained like livestock, and paraded as entertainment. Their meals were rich in carbohydrates to help build body mass. Their days were tightly controlled. Some were volunteers, seeking fame or coin, but most had no choice. Spartacus was one of them. In 73 BCE, something changed. A spark, quiet at first. Spartacus, along with around 70 others, hatched a plan. Using kitchen utensils, skewers and cleavers, they killed their guards, escaped the compound, and raided wagons of real weapons meant for gladiatorial shows. It could have ended there. A small rebellion, easily crushed. But it didn't. The group fled to Mount Vesuvius CS, the same volcano that would later bury Pompeii. From there, they recruited more slaves, more deserters, even shepherds and poor farmers. The mountain gave them height, cover, and time. Rome laughed at first, then panicked. You see, Spartacus wasn't just breaking free, he was winning. The ragtag army he led defeated several Roman detachments sent to capture them. His tactics were strange to Roman eyes: guerrilla strikes, fast retreats, night movements. They were clever, unpredictable, and he treated his followers with fairness. Some said he even refused to fight women or civilians. At one point, Spartacus reportedly wanted to escape over the Alps to return his people to their homelands. But the lure of Rome, or perhaps the impossibility of return, held them in Italy. For 2 long years, Rome failed to suppress the rebellion. Eventually, a powerful and ambitious general, Marcus Licinius Crassus, was given the job. Crassus was not known for mercy. He revived an old, chilling punishment: decimation. If a unit of Roman soldiers failed or fled, every 10th man was executed by his own comrades. Fear returned to the Roman side. Spartacus made a final push southward, perhaps to reach Sicily. But Crassus blocked him. The last battle took place in 71 BCE, near the river Sicily. Spartacus died there. No body was ever officially identified. Some say he fought to the front lines, trying to strike Crassus himself. Others believe he died anonymously, like so many of his followers. In the aftermath, Rome crucified over 6,000 captured rebels along the Appian Way, a long, straight road leading into the heart of the capital. Their bodies hung for miles, as a warning. No names, no graves, just silence. And yet Spartacus refused to vanish. Centuries later, Roman historians, mostly senators, men of status, could not forget him. They tried to diminish him, calling him barbaric or lucky, but his legend grew in the shadows. A slave who rose, a man who said no. In modern times, Spartacus became a symbol for freedom, for resistance, for lost causes. His life was short, his victories temporary, but his story endured, quietly, like a whisper beneath history's louder triumphs. Now, we leave behind the battlefield. The dust settles. The echoes fade. Let's step somewhere even older, stranger, and more forgotten. We'll descend not upward this time but downward, into the sewage systems, latrines, and bathhouse walls of Roman life. Because sometimes, the most honest parts of a civilization aren't found in its marble, but in what it tried to flush away. Roman toilets and curses. Archaeology's grossest discoveries explore sewers, bathhouse graffiti, and magical revenge spells. Imagine you're walking through the side streets of ancient Pompeii. The stones beneath your feet are slick from a recent rain, and the air is faintly sour with the mingled smells of cooking oil, fermenting wine, and something ... less pleasant. You pause at the edge of a narrow alley. Just off the main road, there's a small, arched doorway. Inside is something many ancient Romans used daily but few modern visitors ever picture: a public latrine. Roman toilets, you see, weren't tucked away behind privacy doors. These were communal spaces, long stone benches with keyhole-shaped openings, lined up side by side. No partitions, no shame. You'd sit next to your neighbor, make conversation, and get on with your business. A groove of running water beneath your feet carried waste away, assuming it was flowing that day. And how did they clean themselves? You might wonder. A sponge on a stick, shared, rinsed in vinegar, then passed to the next person. It's not glamorous, but it worked, mostly. What's fascinating is how personal these places feel today, not because of the design, but because of what people left behind. Archaeologists have found graffiti scratched into the walls of latrines and bathhouses, not epic poetry or noble declarations, just raw, human thoughts. Some are crude jokes. Here I had a good dump. May Fortuna bless my bowels. Others are insults, revenge fantasies, or crude declarations of love. In a bathhouse in Ostia, someone carved Secundus loves Iris, even if she farts. These places were not sacred, they were casual, open, real, like the social media of ancient Rome, messy, emotional, and impulsively public. Now let's go deep. Beneath Roman streets ran vast sewer systems. The Cloaca Maxima, or Great Drain, was one of the oldest and largest in the Roman world. Originally an open canal, it evolved into a vast underground tunnel system that flushed rainwater and everything else toward the Tiber River. Down in these tunnels, archaeologists have discovered items no one meant to lose. Coins, hairpins, tiny statues, children's toys, a ring with an etched gem, a sandal strap, traces of someone's life lost in a careless moment. But that's not all they found. Among the refuse were small lead tablets thin inscribed, and always folded tightly. These were Defixion's curse tablets. Curses, in ancient Rome, weren't theatrical. They were businesslike. A disgruntled baker might curse a rival for stealing customers. A jilted lover might name the person who betrayed them. These messages were directed to the underworld gods, Dispota, Hecate, or local spirits who lingered in the dark. One cursed tablet read, "May Verenia be unable to speak, walk, or sleep until she repents for what she has done." Another was more specific. "Bind the tongue, hands, and thoughts of Quartus until he returns the stolen cloak." Some included hair or fingernails. Some were pierced with nails or sunk into graves, hoping the spirit of the dead would deliver the message. It's odd, isn't it? We imagine Roman life as grand old columns and scrolls and clean white tunics, but down in the latrines, scribbled on walls, and whispered into folded lead tablets, we see something more familiar: pettiness, jealousy, anger, humor, love, small, human rituals that no one expected would last for thousands of years. Even in the most unsavory corners of the empire, life left its mark. Now let's gently rise again from the shadows of sewers and spells to something far more gilded. We're heading toward the palace. Because at the other end of Roman life, the very tip of its pyramid, were the emperors and their dinner tables. Next, we'll dine like the elite, taste the absurd, smell the perfume, and quietly ask, how much is too much? Dining with emperors, decadence, poison, and peacocks for dinner, lavish feasts, moral rot, and absurd luxury in Nero's court. Imagine you're reclining, not sitting on a cushioned couch. The light is low, flickering with soft oil lamps. The air is sweet with rosewater, cinnamon, and the faint musky scent of crushed myrrh. You're draped in fine linen, sipping diluted wine from a goblet carved from imported glass. Musicians play softly in the corner. Slaves glide silently around the room, refilling cups, replacing plates, tending to the moods of their masters like shadows. You're at a Roman imperial banquet, not just a dinner, a spectacle. This is not the world of porridge and lentils that most Romans knew. This is Nero's world, Domitian's world, Caligula's, when things got truly strange. Feasts at this level weren't just about food, they were about power, about theater, about indulgence pushed to the very edge of sanity. You might start your evening with dormice stuffed with herbs and pine nuts, then perhaps a side of roasted ostrich or boiled flamingo tongue, praised for its delicate warmth. The peacock wasn't just admired for its feathers, it was served whole, regally arranged with its head still intact, beak glazed in honey. Appetite wasn't necessary. Eating was part of the performance. In some banquets, dishes were chosen less for taste and more for novelty. Jellyfish, parrotfish, dishes dyed with saffron or painted with gold leaf. Edible art, meant to astonish. And if you were lucky or unlucky enough to dine with Nero, the experience may include surprise entertainment. Picture this: the ceiling opens, rose petals fall like rain, and they don't stop. One Roman poet wrote that the petals were so dense, guests suffocated beneath them. This was the excess that defined late imperial life. But with all this decadence came another ingredient, one not on the menu. Fear. Roman elites lived in a world of paranoia. Poison wasn't just a fear of the lower classes, it was a tool of the elite. It slid quietly into goblets and saucers, masked by honey and wine. Food tasters were common. Silverware was tested. Dishes were avoided altogether if prepared by the wrong hands. In Nero's court, even family dinners could become a matter of life or death. Agrippina, his own mother, was said to have survived multiple poisoning attempts before he finally arranged her murder by collapsing her boat. Was this true, or just gossip that clung to the memory of a deeply controversial emperor? The line between fact and rumor is hard to draw in elite Roman life. Writers of the times, Suetonius, Tacitus, Pliny, often hated the emperors they described. So what we know comes to us filtered through disapproval and disbelief. But even discounting the more theatrical tales, there's enough evidence to suggest that luxury and fear lived side by side. The emperor lived in marble halls, and walked them with suspicion. He feasted on nightingale brains, but trusted no one at the table. He could summon 300 dancers with a gesture, but often dined alone, or with spies. What's perhaps most haunting is that all this took place while the city, just outside those palace walls, remained unpredictable. Fires, floods, riots, grain shortages, people scrambling for oil and flour while golden fountains poured perfume over statues in Nero's garden. It was a contrast so sharp it cut through time. So now, as we leave the banquet and step back out into the quiet streets of Rome, you might carry with you a strange calm. The knowledge that even at its most powerful, most absurd, and most cruel, Rome was deeply, deeply human. Closing a gentle reflection and fade into sleep, contrasting the past with the comfort of now. And now, we return. The lamps are dim, the marble floors of Rome are quiet. The last echoes of laughter and footsteps have faded into the stillness of time. You've walked through the cramped quarters of Roman slaves, followed the dusty trail of Spartacus and his fleeting hope, wandered through the strange spells and sewer stones left behind by everyday people, and dined, silently among emperors with too much food and far too little peace. It's strange, isn't it, how distant their world is, and yet so familiar. The rhythms of their lives, though harder, rougher, and far more uncertain, are not so different from ours. Work, rest, struggle, celebration, fear, joy, the need to feel safe, the desire to feel seen. Whether wearing a wool tunic or a silk toga, whether grinding grain by hand or sipping from golden goblets, they lived with the same questions we do. And yet, you're not in a cold insula, worrying if your building might collapse tonight. You're not on the floor of a bathhouse wondering who scratched your name into the wall. You're not whispering into a cursed tablet, hoping it works. You're not sitting across from an emperor with a poisoned cup in your hand. You're here, warm, safe, at rest. The hum of the modern world surrounds you, soft and steady. The mattress beneath you doesn't shift with rats or rain. The light above isn't from fire or oil. You don't need a slave to fan you. You don't need a guard outside your door. You just need stillness and sleep. The Roman world will still be there tomorrow, dusty and strange, waiting patiently in the silence of books, in stone, in the underground layers of cities older than memory. But for now, let it go. Let the weight of the day fade. Let the voices of history soften into whispers. Let your breath grow slower, softer, like the calm after a long march, the quiet after the feast, the hush before the next sunrise. Thank you for traveling through time with me tonight. You're safe, you're still, you're home. Good night. Introduction. Hey there. You're here for a quiet story, aren't you? One that doesn't rush, doesn't shout, just takes its time. So tonight, let's go somewhere cold, somewhere old. Back to the time of the Vikings, but not the kind you're used to. Not the fierce warriors charging into battle with axes and war cries. No, we're going to meet the ones who stayed behind, because truth is, most Vikings weren't raiders. They were farmers, woodworkers, and yes, fishermen. And for them, life wasn't full of glory, it was full of long winters, hard work, and not enough food. So in this story, we'll quietly row out with a fisherman before dawn. We'll follow Leif Erikson to the edge of the world. We'll walk through ancient Viking burial sites, heavy with secrets, and we'll finish inside a firelit mead hall, where the powerful made sure their stories were remembered. It's a slow journey tonight, the kind that helps your thoughts drift, like a boat on still water. So if you're ready, let's begin. Segment 2. Leif Erikson's Forgotten Voyage. Imagine the sea again, but this time you're not just fishing close to shore. This time you're heading west, toward nothing, or at least toward what seems like nothing. It's around the year 1000. You're on a ship made of oak, strong but not exactly comfortable. No cabin, no maps, just the stars above, and the steady rhythm of the waves below. Leif Erikson is the man standing at the front of the ship, tall, quiet, thoughtful, not a loud warrior but a planner. His father, Eric the Red, had already pushed boundaries, founded Greenland, but Leif, he wants to go even farther. Some say he heard about new lands from traders. Others think he was just curious, maybe even a little restless. Either way, he sets out, not for glory, not for conquest, just to see what's there. And after weeks at sea, they spotted a new land, forested soft hills, fresh water, a place where grapes grow, or maybe just berries. They call it Vitland. It's beautiful, quiet, undisturbed. Leif and his crew stay for a while. They build small huts, they fish, hunt, rest. There are no grand stories of battles here, just simple, cautious survival in an unfamiliar place. But the land is far, the sea is rough, and they know they can't stay forever. Eventually, they turn back. They return to Greenland, tell the story. Then life moves on. Leif Erikson's journey fades into memory. No cities are built in Vinland. No maps are made. Just stories passed around the fire, quiet ones, half remembered. And for centuries, the world forgets that Vikings ever came to North America. It would take nearly 1,000 years and a few buried ruins to prove it actually happened. But Leif never needed fame. He saw a new world, and quietly turned home again. Segment 3. Viking burial ships in the Oseberg mystery. Imagine a heavy silence. You're standing in a grassy mound in Norway. Beneath your feet, hidden under centuries of soil, lies a ship long carved and resting in the dark. It's not sailing anymore. It's not moving at all. It hasn't for over 1,000 years. This is the Oseberg ship, a Viking longship not meant for battle or the open sea, but for the afterlife. Back in the year 834, someone, perhaps many, stood here for a funeral. Not the kind we know. No quick ceremony, no headstones, just ritual and reverence, stretching over days. 2 women were buried here. One elderly, possibly a queen, a noblewoman or a priestess. The other younger, perhaps her servant or maybe something else. No one knows exactly who they were. That's the mystery. But whoever they were honored. Their ship was buried with care, packed with everything they might need beyond this life. Silk from Asia, buckets carved with animals, tools, carts, beds, even intricately woven tapestries. Everything speaks not of war but of beauty, art, culture, quiet skill. Quiet skill. Even now, after all this time, the carvings on the ship's prow curl like waves frozen in wood. The workmanship is delicate, gentle, almost tender, but there are still unanswered questions. Why 2 women? Why this ship? Why here? In Oseberg, was this a royal farewell, or a sacred one? The burial had been looted long ago. Whoever came looking for gold found very little, but they couldn't steal the presence of the place. Today, the ship rests in a museum, softly lit. Even in death, it commands silence. It's not loud, it doesn't boast, but it says a lot, without ever speaking. It reminds us that Vikings weren't just warriors. They were builders, artists, dreamers, and in death, as in life, they tried to bring some of their world with them. Segment 4. Mead halls and warlord games. Imagine yourself stepping inside a great wooden hall. The air is thick with smoke and the sweet scent of mead, a honey wine poured generously into rough-hewn cups. Outside, the wind howls across the fjords, but here, inside, it's warm, loud, alive. The heart of Viking elite life, owned by a warlord, a jarl, or a powerful chieftain. These halls weren't just for feasting, they were stages, where power was performed, stories were spun, and alliances were sealed with drink and gift. You wouldn't sit just anywhere. Where you sat, what you drank from, what you were given. All of it meant something. It was politics in the form of hospitality, power disguised as generosity. And at the center of it all, near the fire, stood the skald, the poet, not a bard playing soft tunes, but a verbal warrior. The skald's job was to immortalize victories, honor ancestors, and if necessary insult enemies with clever, biting verse. Words were as deadly as axes here, just slower. A powerful lord might gift you a finely forged sword, or a heavy gold arm ring. But these weren't just presents, they were obligations. If you took the gift, you owed loyalty, maybe blood. So much of this world was built on gift-giving games. To give generously was to show your strength. To receive gracefully, and repay it later, was to show your honor. And yet, beneath the bluster, you could feel the pressure. Even at the top, the elite had to constantly prove themselves. One failed harvest, one bad raid, one rumor of weakness, and someone younger, hungrier, might take your place. The feasting could last for days. Songs would echo, fires would crackle, stories would grow taller with every round of mead. But in between the laughter, there was always something unspoken. You could lose everything overnight. Still, for those brief evenings while the candles flickered low and the hall rang with laughter and boasts, it might have felt like time had stopped, like winter couldn't touch you. And in that warmth, however fleeting, there was power. And now, we return, slowly, from the flickering firelight, from the heavy cups and quiet deals, to the stillness of now. In a moment, we ease into the closing, a soft reflection on the Viking world and the strange comfort of distance. Just let me know when you're ready, asked ChatGPT. Closing echoes across the fjord, continued. It was also hunger gnawing at your ribs through the winter. A quiet prayer whispered into stormy winds, the creak of oars cutting across misty fjords, the slow thud of boots on frozen ground, and the waiting, always the waiting for fish, for trade, for word from the sea. For every story of battle glory, there were hundreds more of routine, mending nets, repairing sails, hauling dripping lines out of icy black water, sitting by a low fire in a smoky longhouse wrapped in furs, waiting for morning or spring. Viking life was not one of constant violence. It was a rhythm, harsh but steady, a blend of survival and belief, of loyalty and cold. And for the few who ruled, the chieftains, the jarls, the kings, it was a game of prestige, of feasts and alliances, of poetry and power. But even they were never far from the salt of the sea and the weight of the sky. As you drift now away from the carved holes and bone pins, from the sagas whispered in the firelight, from the icy breath of the north wind, may you rest knowing that history, even at its most forgotten, has weight and wonder. You don't need to hold it all in your mind. Let it sink like an anchor. Let it drift like a sail. Let it fade into the tide of sleep. You were there, and now you can let go. Good night. Gentle introduction. Welcome to the port. Hello, and welcome. Tonight you're invited to drift back in time to the humid, sun-drenched edges of the 18th century Caribbean, where the waves slapped endlessly against wooden docks, and the salty breeze carried whispers of trade, sweat, rum, and sails. This is not a tale of grand naval battles or dazzling pirate legends, though those shadows do pass through. No, this is something quieter, slower, a gentle stroll through the rhythm of daily life, where barrels rolled, wigs itched, ropes creaked, and fortunes were counted in sugar, gold, and human lives. This was a world of contradictions, of blinding light and choking shadows, of desperate laborers and overdressed officials, of gunpowder and perfumed letters. And tonight, we'll explore it all softly, calmly, and in no rush at all. So, get comfortable. Let the outside world fall away, and imagine yourself standing on a sun-bleached dock, the scent of molasses thick in the air, as the sails of a distant ship ripple lazily into the harbor. We begin, at ground level, among the ropes and rats, with the dockworkers of Port Royal, or maybe Bridgetown or St. Domingue. It hardly matters where, because in every Caribbean port, the story was remarkably the same. Segment 1. A day in the life of a dockworker. It's early morning. The sun hasn't come up yet, but the air is already warm. You wake up on a pile of old cloth, maybe in a tiny shack near the water. There are bugs buzzing around, and your clothes are sticky with yesterday's sweat. You don't have much a rough shirt, maybe a rope belt, no shoes. The wooden docks are wet under your feet. You're a dock. That means lifting heavy barrels, pushing crates, tying up ships. It's loud, messy, and constant. The air smells like sugar and salt and old wood. Sometimes it smells like fish too. You hear voices all around, different languages. Some people speak French, English, Spanish, others speak Creole or African languages. But everyone understands the work. The barrels are full of sugar, molasses, rum, or tobacco. Sticky stuff, heavy stuff. The sugar dust gets in your nose and makes your hands feel rough. Sometimes the barrels leak and it dries on your skin like glue. When you get a break, if you get one, you sit on a box and eat a bit of dry bread or some salted fish. Maybe you sip a little grog, just to help your body keep moving. There are rats on the docks. Lots of them. They dart between the crates and chew on whatever they find. Nobody really cares anymore. They're just part of the place. The sun climbs higher. It gets hotter. The rich people stand on balconies, watching from the shade. They wear clean clothes and powdered wigs. You try not to look. By sunset, you're covered in sweat and dust. You can't tell where the salt from your skin ends and the sea air begins. Your back aches and your hands are full of splinters. Some nights you find a place to sleep. Other nights you just curl up behind some barrels. You're too tired to think, too tired to dream, and the next day you wake up and do it all again. Segment 2. Blackbeard's final battle, truth versus legend. Now let's step away from the docks. Let the crates and the rats fade into the background, and sail out onto the sea, where whispers of pirates still drift in the breeze. One name stands out more than most: Blackbeard. You've probably heard the stories. That he lit matches in his beard and looked like a demon. That he drank gunpowder mixed with rum. That he tied slow-burning fuses under his hat to scare his enemies. And yeah, a lot of it is true, but a lot of it isn't. Like many stories from the past, the truth and the legend are tangled together, like ropes on a ship. His real name was Edward Teach, or maybe Thatch. Historians aren't totally sure. He was tall, broad, and he did wear a thick black beard, which he braided and tied with ribbons. But he wasn't always a pirate. He started off as a sailor, a regular man from England, probably from a port city like Bristol. He worked on ships during the War of Spanish Succession, and learned how to fight, how to sail, how to take orders. Then the war ended, and a lot of sailors found themselves out of work. So, some turned pirate. Blackbeard was one of them. He worked with a man named Benjamin Hornigold for a while, and then took over his own ship, a big, captured French vessel that he renamed Queen Anne's Revenge. It had 40 guns. 40. Not many ships could match that. But here's something interesting. Blackbeard didn't actually kill that many people. He preferred intimidation. He wanted to scare you into giving up. That's why he dressed wild smoke, beard, eyes blazing. People were more likely to surrender without a fight, and that meant fewer risks for him and more treasure. But governments didn't like that. And in 1718, the governor of Virginia sent out a mission to stop him, led by a young officer named Lieutenant Robert Maynard. They found Blackbeard near a small island in North Carolina, Craycock. It was early morning. The sun hadn't risen yet. The sea was calm, but under that still surface, tension built like a storm. Maynard's men rowed quietly, their ships light and fast. Blackbeard's crew fired the first shots. Cannons roared across the water, but Maynard had a trick. He hid most of his men below deck, so when Blackbeard boarded, expecting an easy win, Maynard's sailors jumped out with pistols and swords. What followed was quick, brutal, and confusing. The two men fought. Maynard later said Blackbeard was shot 5 times and stabbed more than 20 before he finally fell. Was that true? Maybe, or maybe it was a little exaggerated to make the victory sound grander. What we know is this: Blackbeard died that day, and his head was hung from the front of the ship to prove he was really gone. But here's the thing. Even after his death, the stories only grew. People said they saw his ghost, said his treasure was still buried on the islands, said the ocean itself remembered him. Whether those things are true or not doesn't really matter. Because now Blackbeard lives on not as a man, but as a shadow in our minds, part history, part legend. And maybe that's the most pirate thing of all. Segment 3. Lost pirate treasures and underwater ruins. Let's leave behind the smoke of cannons and slip beneath the surface of the sea, down where the water turns dark blue and cold, where sunken things sleep in silence, and the stories get softer, almost like they're being whispered through water. When most people think of pirates, they think of treasure, gold, silver, chests full of coins and pearls and emeralds. But real pirate treasure, it wasn't always so shiny. More often it was crates of sugar, rolls of tobacco, barrels of rum or indigo dye worth plenty at the time. Still, some ships did carry gold, and some didn't make it back to port. That's where the stories begin. One of the most famous wrecks, the Widow Galley. She was a slave ship, captured by the pirate Samuel Black Sam Bellamy. Bellamy used it as his flagship, until one stormy night in 1717, when the sea swallowed it whole. For over 260 years, people guessed where it might have gone down. Then, in the 1980s, a team actually found it off the coast of Cape Cod, and inside, real treasure, gold coins, silver bars, a pistol, even a pirate's belt buckle, all resting beneath layers of sand and seaweed. There's something quiet about shipwrecks. They're like time capsules, preserved by salt and silence. Each one tells a story of a crew that set out and never came back. In the Caribbean, there are hundreds of them. Spanish galleons, merchant ships, pirate vessels, all slowly dissolving beneath coral and fish and drifting currents. Some of them may still have treasure. Others just carry the echoes of voices long gone. Even today, treasure hunters go searching. Some use old maps, some rely on legends passed down for generations. There's talk of Blackbeard's hidden stash, buried somewhere in North Carolina. No one's found it. There's a rumor about Captain Kidd's gold, possibly buried on Gardiner's Island, still unfound. But maybe the real treasure isn't the gold. Maybe it's the mystery itself, the wondering, the slow brush of a diver's hand across a carved wooden plank, a plank that hasn't seen sunlight in centuries. Imagine it, deep underwater, the world above is gone, just silence, pressure, and the ghostly outline of a ship's ribs half covered in sand. Fish move through its bones. An anchor lies crooked nearby, a spoon, rusted but still recognizable. No shouting, no pirates, just the sea, remembering. And the more you look, the less certain you become. Was that treasure chest real or just driftwood? It doesn't really matter, because down here in the quiet, everything becomes part of the story. Segment 4. The Sugar Barons. Life of the Caribbean elite. We've seen the salty, sunburned lives of pirates, the cramped misery of dock workers and the shipwrecks sleeping in silence. But now, let's step into something very different. Close your eyes. Imagine silk curtains fluttering in a breeze. A grand plantation house sits on a hill overlooking the sea, white columns, wide verandas, porcelain teacups on polished tables. This, was the world of the sugar barons. In the 1700s and 1800s, islands like Jamaica, Barbados, and St. Domingue, modern-day Haiti, were some of the richest colonies on earth. And the people at the top, they lived in a different universe entirely. These were men and women who owned plantations, huge farms that produced sugar, rum, and molasses. The work was brutal, but the rewards, immense. Many of them didn't even live on the islands full-time. They were called absentee landlords. They sipped wine in London while money poured in from the Caribbean, but some did stay. And if you were invited to their estate, you'd find a strange mix of tropical heat and European manners. Think velvet coats in 90-degree weather. Think English gardens surrounded by palm trees. Think grand dinner parties candlelit, with servants standing by. The barons often tried to recreate British high society, but in a place built on sun, sweat, and sugarcane. They read poetry, played the violin, held afternoon teas in gazebos. Their homes had tall ceilings to keep cool, shutters to block the sun, and long shaded porches for watching the horizon. But here's something the history books don't always show. Behind every polished silver fork was a life of unimaginable labor. Thousands of enslaved people, men, women, children, were forced to work the fields that paid for the chandeliers above. The barons wrote letters about their dinner menus, while people in the fields had no shoes. It's this contrast that makes history so haunting. One life, full of luxury, the other, full of exhaustion. And yet, in the stillness of these old houses, both voices echo. If you walk through the ruins of a plantation today, the wind whispers through cracked shutters, and vines crawl over what's left of the walls. Time has softened the marble, but not the memory. The sugar barons are long gone, the teacups broken, the ledgers closed. But the story, it remains, just like the quiet sea, always watching, always remembering.